All right, YouTube, time for Occult Literature Video 44, Napoleon's Oraculum, one of the most fun works that I edited. Sometimes it can get a little bit tedious, you get a lot of dense philosophical stuff. Not the case with Napoleon's Oraculum, famous sort of late 1800s fortune-telling hand guide. I'll get into a little bit more that needs to be said, and I promise, make a video along the lines of a blog post, a fairly long one that I made not too long ago, I think last week, on this topic. Link in the description to where you can purchase this work. By the way, this one comes highly recommended. If you're into the folkish side of magic, this is the best one. And second link to my books blog, of course, where you can purchase this and many other works. There's the Universal Fortune Teller, which is kind of similar. The Philosophical Merlin, which is older and also somewhat similar. Many other works, Alchemy, Grimoires, got it all. If you want occultism, just come on to Amazon and go to the books blog. You can find literally anything under the sun that you would happen to want. Napoleon's Oraculum is part of a cycle of technically 7, but 5 main distinct works that I've identified, sort of going back to a late 1700s folkish fortune-telling tradition, twain with a very early 1800s, starting with the Philosophical Merlin, oracle tradition within occult literature. And from these two traditions, there are 3 other major works and several minor works that are sort of intermingled together in their content. Napoleon's Oraculum, this is the Frank Toosey version, is the best of them all, in my opinion. The Universal Fortune Teller of the late 1700s is quite good. The Universal Fortune Teller that came in the 1800s is also quite good. It's also lengthy. The Philosophical Merlin is definitely worth it. There's a newer version, early 1900s, of the same Oraculum, which omits most of the interesting material and simply expands the oracle itself. Now, the oracle works similarly to the Philosophical Merlin's oracle system. That is, it works upon the same basic premise, but it slims it down and gives it a more utilitarian purpose. In the Philosophical Merlin, the point was to create 4 rows of lines and then 4 more rows of lines, drawing lines sort of absent-mindedly in the sand or whatever, adding them up, and getting a 1 or a 2 on the end. When you combine them, you have either an odd or even number of lines, and from that, combining those together, you then cast a nativity for yourself, which shows sort of the things you should avoid, where you might expect to find moles on your body, all sorts of different stuff, and it claims, of course, a Napoleonic origin. Napoleon's Oraculum by Toosey takes the same basic premise. It doesn't have the Napoleon backstory, but it's obviously attributed to Napoleon, judging from the title. It takes the same oracle system, removes the second system of rows so that there's only one set of 4 that you're casting. What you do is you ask the oracle a question, then you cast the lines, determine the specific symbol, which is 4 rows of stars, either 1 or 2 in each row, and that gives you your answer according to a sort of main broadsheet, of which, and to this are associated numerous other sheets that give you the answer to your question. There are various questions you can ask. But Frank Toosey took it further than the Philosophical Merlin system, simply changed to ask questions instead of cast a nativity. That is, there are certain spells that you can perform, certain sort of charms and rites. Some of these have pagan inclusions, which is one of the main reasons I like this work so much. I can't say enough about it. I can make like a 30-minute video about how great the Oraculum is compared to a lot of other sort of fortune-telling, astrology, works like that. It has the basic zodiac within. It has dream interpretation, tricks with cards, dominoes, and dice for telling fortunes, especially related to marriage and love. Now, a lot of the bulk of the content revolves around romance. Not all of it. Some of it revolves around literal fortune telling, as in asking the oracle questions, and dream interpretation only partially has to do with sort of the love and the lust. A lot of it also has to do with wealth. And I have to say, Napoleon's Oraculum's dream interpretation passages, while not as overwhelming as certain websites or certain other books solely dedicated to the topic, is probably, in my mind anyway, more accurate. I know that there are a lot of New Age movements that try to reinterpret sort of dream symbology. There are movements that sort of give it a hippie-ish feel to it, or they try to delve into Native American lore without, in many cases, apparently having studied any native lore or taken account of which tribe they're taking that lore from. And it all sort of falls apart. Napoleon's Oraculum doesn't do that. It doesn't give really an explanation for where the symbology, the tradition behind it comes from, but at the same time, it goes well with the rest of the text, as opposed to the newer Oraculum from about 20 years after Tuesey's version that omits all of that extra material, simply adds a prognostication for children born on each day of the week, and just contains an expanded Oraculum. But I would rather use the shortened version of the Oraculum found in this version. And that's why I won't even bother to release the newer Oraculum. I'd rather use the shorter version in conjunction with all of these other things. And a lot of them come from that late 1700s fortune teller tradition. The Miss Bridget's, the Norwood Gypsy fortune teller hand guide from the 1790s is really where a lot of this stuff begins. I have to assume that that's where the inclusion came from. It seems to have gone through both British and French tradition in the early 1800s, and Toosey became aware of it, added it to the Oraculum that came from the British Philosophical Merlin of 1822, and he added in this material that had carried on from traditions dating to the 1700s. Now, there's a secondary text of importance in the same style as the Philosophical Merlin, released by the same people as the 1860 version of the Universal Fortune Teller, same format and everything as all of these three texts, that has the same similar dream interpretation passages in it, that are also alluded to in the 1700s version, but not fully. I know this is a little bit dense. It goes into literary history a little bit, but I'm a bibliophile. I love literary history, so when I was looking at this and I realized nobody else had formulated any sort of theory on the subject at all of these two intertwined traditions, I said, well, this is something I should definitely make a post on. Napoleon's Oraculum, though, smack dab in the middle of all of these texts, is probably the best compilation thereof. The only thing it's really missing is the tea leaves and sort of the single card trick that's spoken of in both versions of the Universal Fortune Teller, which is quite a bit longer. In Toosey's version, this one, they're quite a bit shorter, but there are multiple different tricks that you can use. I know that there's also a magnetic trick that you can do with a watch, and it seems to have been just thrown in there for interest, and it actually, that's an old tradition, goes back to like the Petit Albert, if you can believe that. I have to assume the French cycle did have something to do with the manufacture of some of these works, because the only other similar thing I can find is in the Little Albert, which was a French text from the 1700s. So I was quite excited to realize this. As you can tell, one of my favorite works, this is right up there with the Grand Grimoire as far as the interest that I perceived in it. Now, I dropped the font size to make it look more like the original Oraculum. Most often I don't do that. I modernize the text size. With this, I couldn't do that. I had to fit it in, make it appropriate. I can't remember exactly the page count. I believe it was 74, if I remember. So it's a fairly lengthy work considering the subject matter. Definitely worth the investment. If you're into astrology or dream interpretation or oracles or anything like this, this is literally the foremost work. It's better than the Philosophical Merlin. The Philosophical Merlin is great. There's nothing wrong with it. The oracle system there is quite interesting. This takes the same exact system almost, simplifies it slightly, it requires much less explanation, and applies it to a new sort of practice. Very good work, Frank Toosey. This is his masterpiece. I highly recommend this work above almost all others within the lexicon of occult literature. So again, link in the description to where you can purchase my edition of this work on Amazon. It's going to be cheaper than the other editions. It's also going to be in more of an original format, so keep that in mind. Second link to my books blog. That's about all. Peace out.